Terrific. Welcome. Welcome to In the Inquiry. So, just to kind of set the context here, this is not a conversation about tactics or playbooks or how to win deals. In the Inquiry really is exploring what happens inside leaders when responsibility scales faster than certainty, and when decisions get heavier, pressure becomes ambient, and what used to work stops working as cleanly. So today we're joined by Neil Saltman. Neil Saltman and I have known each other for about 5 years, and we worked at the same company. So this isn't like a cold conversation. It's one that's grounded in shared operating context and mutual respect. Neil has spent years in senior revenue and go-to-market leadership roles, and often at the intersection of cybersecurity, buyers, sellers, and executive decision making. And he also co-authored a book, Cybersecurity Sales: A Buyer's and Seller's Perspective, which reflects a rare ability to hold both sides of the table at once. And what I'm interested in here isn't Neil's resume or frameworks. Uh, it's really how his relationship to judgment, authority, and pressure has evolved as scope increased and decisions started to compound. So, Neil, I'm really, really glad to have you in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And as you pointed out, it's not a cold conversation. I'm excited to be in another warm conversation with my friend Terry Seymour. So I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific. So let's start off, when familiar instincts start to fray a little. So we've both been around long enough to see patterns repeat, right? So when did you first notice that instincts that had always served you started to feel less reliable?
It's an interesting question because I don't think I've ever followed a natural pattern. I've always looked for things other people aren't doing. And so I think early on, I've always been a big reader, and it's always been how can I educate myself? How can I do things others aren't doing? So I don't think I was always looking to improve on the pattern, so to speak, and not necessarily follow one. So I
Mhm.
don't think there was ever a point in my career where I got comfortable and said, this is the path forward. And I even think a lot about in general, what can I do differently all the time? So I would say that I'm not there are certainly patterns I do follow, but in general, I'm always looking for ways to do things differently.
Mhm. So was there a moment where you realized force or intensity wasn't the answer anymore?
Yeah, yeah. I actually a long, long time ago, I was interviewing for a job that I really wanted. A buddy of mine said, "This company's going to change the world. You got to come work here." And so I decided to interview with them. They flew up, to my area. We met at the airport. We had a 3 hour lunch almost. That was supposed to be like an hour long interview. And I thought, "Holy cow, I'm going to get this job." And they said, "All right." They said, "This is great. Tell us what accounts you can get us into." And I said, I'll get you any account you want. And they said, no, no, I don't think you understand. We need people that know you that want to take a meeting because Neil is here, as opposed to you just saying, I can do it through brute force. And it got me to reflect and think, all right, like if brute force isn't enough because that's what everyone else is doing, how can I change things? And so I built out a roundtable based on that. And I've been running a cybersecurity CISO security leader roundtable for years, but it started because of that, because it was ultimately like it's not good enough to be able to attack an account until you get in. You've got to build the relationships. And my line of thinking, after that conversation was, how can I build those relationships? And so I started to sort of change it and think, how can I become part of the community? How can I build something, and how can I never have that situation again where somebody tells me that brute force just isn't good enough?
Hmm. So what stopped working before you were fully aware it had stopped working?
I mean, I guess my definition of success has changed over the years, but I was having success, but I think it got exponentially larger when I stopped looking at everything as how do I pound the door down, and more of a servant type of mentality of like, how can I serve people? I've always jokingly said, right, if somebody says that they want to build a fence, I don't think, how can I sell them the fence? I start thinking, all right, where can we find the wood and who's going to help them build this thing? And so I start looking at like, how can we do this? How can we really help out here? As opposed to the how much money can I make for doing it? And I'm not saying it's necessarily the right mentality because I think a lot of people are looking for maximum profit, minimal effort. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But I would say I've always kind of looked at the how can I help mentality versus the how can I maximize profit mentality.
Got it. What did that realization cost you internally?
I mean, I think there's been opportunities I've probably missed out on, and I think I tend to come across, you know, I would say I think most people that know me know I'm confident, but I don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. And I think a lot of times people will look at me and assume that I'm just not confident or that I'm not taking charge when in reality, I'm just not force feeding anything to anybody. I'm having open dialogues. And I think there are times where I've had run-ins with managers and run-ins with other people because they felt like I wasn't handling how they thought I wanted to. I actually remember a specific instance where one of our chief revenue officers wanted to fire me because we had a deal that we were working on for like 2 years, and I kept telling him they're never going to buy it at this price. And he said, "Well, you're just not doing it right." So we flew down to the customer. We met with him. He met with the customer, and the customer kind of told him what I'd been telling him, that price was wrong. We went back. He went to the CEO. He got the price we need. We got the deal done. And then he tried to tell the CEO, "See, if I'd been involved earlier, this deal would have gotten done." And I wasn't going to stand up and scream, "This guy's a liar." But I mean,
Mhm.
I think I got a little bit of reprimanding for not dealing with it the right way. And my response was, I guess I just didn't yell loud enough because he
Mhm.
gave me the same message just in a different format. And so I think there's been situations where I probably needed to speak a little bit louder, that even though I was the one doing the right thing, I wasn't the one yelling louder than everybody in the room.
Yeah, I think a lot of people watching this can really empathize that with that. That sounds to me still more external. So that what did it cost you internally? What was going on with you inside?
Inside, I was ready to quit. I was done. I'd given up on the company, and I was just thinking to myself, like, I can't do it. You think about career change at that point. Am I doing the right things? And I think I kind of realized that I'm not going to let a person make those decisions for me. I'm not going to let somebody else push me around to a point where I don't want to do what I like doing because they exist. And the guy ended up getting fired. The CEO and I had a long conversation, and very shortly after that, he actually got fired. And the company became a fun place to work again. And so I think it was more of an internal struggle of am I doing the right things? Is this worth the time? And eventually realizing that those people come and go, but it's more about how you feel about it at the end of the day.
Right. So internally, it created a little self-doubt for you, maybe not certainty, but it also sounds like what then started, coming up for you was, you know, a place of boundaries and a place where you started really being uh, very confident in your position because you were more centered. You came back to your center. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think it was kind of the day where imposter syndrome started to go away a little bit. Like we all have it. We all think everybody around me must know something I don't know. I think that was the day I started to realize that title doesn't mean that you have more information. And I think that was so I became more centered and less I stopped believing that everybody around me knew more than I did. I stopped I got rid of the imposter syndrome for the most part, felt confident in what I was doing, realizing that again, that the guy with the title or the loud voice doesn't necessarily make them right. And so I think it allowed me to start to look at people with a little more clear context and a little more open eyes, as opposed to the walking in the room and just making the assumption that that person must know more because they keep talking.
All right, let's talk a little more about this judgment under sustained pressure. And I want you to kind of lean into your lived experience, not theory.
Yeah.
So when pressure is constant, not episodic, how do you know it's affecting your judgment?
I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing with stress. I mean, I think it certainly does, right? There's always times where you start to think, holy cow, okay, I've got to get this done. I believe very much in my reputation. I'm a believer in self-fulfilling prophecy, in that if you believe something, then it's more likely to happen than not. And so I think that's allowed me to do a lot of things, and I think that's how I recenter myself is by believing that this is the right thing and I'm doing the right thing regardless. So when stress starts to hit and you start to look at things and you start to think, holy cow, why am I doing this? Right? It ultimately starts to get to a point where you recenter yourself because you realize that like
Mhm.
stress is temporary and that you have a goal in mind and that you want to be consistent with who you are as a person.
Yeah, I get that. I don't want to go conceptual. Like I want to bring it back to more experiential. So where do you feel it first?
When I get stressed out,
Uh-huh.
I mean, when I get stressed out, I think, trying to think, I ultimately self-doubt, right? Internal. It's I'm not one that usually tries to put it back on other people. So I start to doubt myself. I start to think, why am I doing this? I start to get really, really frustrated and down, but I'm pretty good at recovering quickly because again, I go back to who I am as a person and is this consistent with my values and who I want to be? And so I'm pretty good about getting out of those situations. I mean, even taking life circumstances of like people that are sick in my life, and you start to think I have no control. I look to bigger things than myself, and I start to think, okay, well, I've got to recenter myself. I've got to remove that stress because otherwise I can't function. So I'm not somebody who usually holds on to it very long. I'll
Mm.
start to, if I don't have an answer, then I'll pray about it, or I'll look for something larger than myself to recenter myself.
So there's so you have the ability, as a distinction to catch it when it comes up. So if that self-doubt or second guessing or any of that sabotagey stuff starts surfacing, you can actually catch it yourself.
I think I usually do, and if I don't, my wife does and tells me I'm being a jerk, and then I fix it, right? It's no, I think I'm usually pretty good about catching myself, but I'm also really, really big on self-reflection. I'm again going back to the fact that I read a lot. I'm always looking to improve. So in order to improve, you have to be self-aware. So
Hmm.
you have to recalibrate. You have to look at those things and start to think, well, what can I do better, right? And there's certainly areas I fall short. I'm not claiming to be a saint or anybody who's perfect or even the best at anything that I do. But in order for me to continue to improve as a human, as an employee, as all the things I am, I have to make sure that I'm aware of the things that are around me. So with stress, I try to figure out, am I acting the way I normally do? Is this impacting me a way where I can't be consistent? And if so, how do I fix it? So I like to believe that I usually find that. I'm sure there's circumstances where I haven't, but
Hmm.
I'm usually constantly trying to figure out is this what I would do in a normal circumstance, or is this something that's out of the ordinary that I'm not behaving the way that I should behave?
Yeah. So what kind of decisions get distorted earliest for you?
Uh, what kind of decisions were early that made me realize that I needed to stop stressing out so much? Um, I mean, test taken as a kid, right? There's always that, is the anxiety of tests. But in the working world, I think I don't know. One of the ones that comes out when I first got promoted, right? I was an inside sales rep, and I got promoted to become an account manager, and Boston was my territory, which is not where I live.
Mm.
And so I flew up. My manager met me because obviously I was new and he wanted to make sure I did it right. Very laid back guy. I was very lucky to have the manager I had. And he said, Boston is a nightmare to drive around. Said, make sure you leave early. Go get breakfast, go do whatever you need to do, just make sure you're there super early. And of course, I was like, oh yeah, of course, right? So I didn't do what he asked. I left my hotel. I think at the time, MapQuest or whatever I printed out said it's 32 minutes door to door. And I was like, all right, I'll give myself an hour. So I was like, all right. So I drove and I would have made it perfectly on time, but I missed the exit to go to my meeting. And when I missed the exit, it probably took me almost 2 hours to get to the meeting. So of course, as I got there, right as the meeting was ending, my boss walked outside and he started laughing, and I'm like sweating and angry, like, holy cow, I can't believe I did that. And he just laughed and he said, next time you may want to think about taking my advice on this. And he said, the meeting went great. You're in good shape. Don't worry about it. And he was very calm and cool and collected about it. And I was super frustrated. But there were a lot of situations I dealt with him, and I think he kind of taught me not to get stressed out over that stuff. But it was though I the other one I remember, I closed my first deal, it was only a couple months later, and I had one of those customers that love free things, right? You know, we've all had them, and he said, why don't you come over and we'll get dinner afterwards and we'll celebrate?" And I said, "Great." My boss said, "All right, I'll go up there with you. We'll go to Boston again together." And so we did. We picked him up at his house, which I don't know if I've ever done that since. And I did find that kind of weird picking up a customer I wasn't friends with at his house. And he yelled, "Honey, are you ready to go?" So he brought his wife, which we didn't know he was bringing, didn't ask. And so we go out to dinner. I didn't have a plan. It was just let's go. So he picks the most expensive steakhouse that's a couple miles from his house, orders every appetizer you can think of, couple bottles of wine. I think at the end he says, "Can I bring dessert home for my kids?" And and again, I mean, I'm a young rep thinking, "Holy cow, I'm about to expense this massive dinner. What am I supposed to do?" And we got in the car, and again, my boss was like, "All right, like let's take a breath. Let's think about this. What lessons did we learn? Maybe you should learn the wine menu ahead of time and offer, do you want wine A or wine B? Maybe you should offer a couple appetizers instead of letting them pick the five different shrimp cocktail boats that were there and the lobster tail and all the things." He said, "And maybe you pick the restaurant ahead of time so you at least know what you're in for." And so I think there were a lot of early situations where I started to look at it and I'd make mistakes, but I think his calm nature helped me overcome it. And I've tried to replicate that over time to be the calming force instead of the "why did you do that?"
Mhm. We've worked in environments where decisiveness is rewarded, right?
Yep.
So what did you have to let go up of about yourself, how you saw yourself as a revenue leader?
To be more decisive, you're saying?
Well, just in general. So, these environments that we've worked in where decisiveness is rewarded,
Yeah.
did you have to let go of anything about how you saw yourself as a revenue leader in that?
Yeah, I have one of my personality flaws is I have to be liked. Like it's one of those things where I can't stand when people start telling me I'm a jerk or they start yelling at me
So
and
kind
I
of the
think
pleaser thing.
yeah, and I think that's something I've had to let go of because you realize, especially when money's involved, most people don't leave happy, especially when you're selling services instead of product. Everybody has a vision, and unless you're doing it yourself, it's very rare that people walk away and say this was fantastic. And so, and even if they do, there's always the "but you didn't do this." And so, I think the people pleasing aspect is what I kind of had to leave at the door. Is I had to start to realize that like happiness is a piece of it, but it's not the whole thing. And people may draw conclusions about you with things you don't have control over. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing I had to check at the door was realizing that not everybody is going to love me. I'm not a perfect human, and
Hmm.
that there are going to be situations I just can't control how people feel about it.
So what kind of authority do you trust now that you didn't before?
I trust my own opinion. Again, I don't think that everybody knows more than me anymore. I think there's a lot of people that do, but I think when I have an opinion, I'm much more decisive and much more convicted in the opinions. Not to say it can't be changed,
Hmm.
but I'm not so quick to turn around and say, "You know what, I was wrong. Let's go with your idea." I think that's something that's changed significantly over time.
So what version of being right did you have to retire?
I used to go the opposite. I would assume I was wrong and assume that everybody had better ideas than I did and that that was the way to go. And so I think it was the other way around is I had to start assuming I was right unless proven wrong because I had the experience and I had the success that I could build off of. And so, I obviously take other people's ideas and always collaborate,
Hmm.
but I now will assume that I'm right unless proven wrong in a situation where I have the experience where I think in the past I was definitely not so confident in that area.
So as responsibility expanded, what became more expensive internally, even if it looked successful externally?
That's a good question. Expanded what became more expensive. Uh, Probably my time. I mean, I think more than anything else, it's trying to control your time and be able to get all the things done that you want to get done. I think, when as an individual contributor, and even just as a younger person, you have a lot more time, and time is not quite as valuable. And I think that's probably the thing that has become more expensive is that realizing where to spend your time, where not to spend your time, where to build relationships, where not to build relationships. I think it's time is more expensive than it's ever been before.
So what kind of energy do you protect now that you didn't early? Is it time?
Yeah, I don't take every meeting that's asked. I was a believer before that I still believe everybody has value. It's up to you to figure out what it is. But
Mhm.
I can't go to lunch with everyone. I can't take a 15-minute call with everyone. I can't always respond instantly. And so I think time is the thing I'm a lot more protective of than I ever was in the past.
Got it. Where do you see senior revenue leaders quietly paying a tax they don't name?
It's a good question. I mean, I think they're staying longer at companies than they were in the past because I think there's a little bit of question about the current circumstances of the economy. It's been sort of up and down over the last few years. So I
Mhm.
think there's probably a little more willing to take things they wouldn't have taken in the past. I don't think they have as much leverage as they've had in the past. And so I think there's a lot of I'm going to do what I can do to be successful where I'm at versus the taking the righteous stance and saying, this isn't for me. I'm going to go do something else.
So how has that changed the way you carry decisions when the pressure is high?
Yeah, I mean, I going back to the feeling right and being confident. I don't know that that impacts me as much as it impacts other people. I mean, I think generally I still feel pretty good about my place in the market. I'm where I want to be. I'm happy where I'm at, and
Mhm.
and I'm pretty comfortable. And I'm pretty comfortable if I needed to go somewhere else, I could. So I would say I'm seeing that more as a trend. I don't think that's a personal thing that I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you spent time holding both the buyer and seller perspectives vis-a-vis your the research, and life experience with your book. So, what misunderstandings persist on both sides, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's understanding the other side, right? When you think about marriage, it's tough when any two people are together trying to see things the same way. Well, buying and selling is kind of the same, is that I think one of the biggest lessons I took away was I was looking at everything through my own lens. So an example would be buying cycles, right? When we would talk about how quickly can we get to a purchase, and we would say, all right, well, if you need to buy by December, how do we get there? Where the buyer was looking at things and saying, if I'm gonna buy this by December, I mean it's because I plan to deliver it by March, and that's how my bonus is done. And I think that was a big difference, is just how we looked at things was we didn't always look at it from the same perspective. I think, it's a longer term game, and it's what is in it for the buyer. What everybody has a personal win, and then there's a company win. And I think when people can start to understand how the other benefits, as
Mhm.
opposed to looking at it from their own lens, I think that makes a world of difference. I heard more stories from interviews when I wrote the book from buyers that had been, we'll call it, bribed by people that didn't believe they were bribing. I remember one specific story where a bunch of companies mailed out marketing stuff, right? They all mailed out. One company mailed about five different security leaders, probably a lot more than that, but five that actually brought this specific instance up, where they had been sent a remote control car, but they didn't send the remote with it. And I think I was sorry, the other way around. They sent the remote, and they said, if you meet with us, we'll give you the car. And
Mhm.
one of them put the remote up in his office because it had the company logo on it as a reminder to never meet with that company again. And the other four remembered it very clearly and who it was, because they said, I don't want to be bribed my time. And they would openly admit, like, I'll take a steak dinner. If you know where I went to college, I'll take a coffee mug. Like, it's not that they won't take it, but it's a thoughtful gift as opposed to a gift that's bribing them to take a meeting. And I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of that in sales where it's like, and it comes across as very sleazy, slimy, and tricky, where you start to look at it and say, well, how can I get them to pay attention to me, as opposed to what is it that they want to accomplish, or how can I help them? And it slight but very different things.
So, Just continuing with that train of thought, where do sellers most often misread buyers? Not tactically, but psychologically.
Psychologically, I think we think too often about what we want to say next instead of thinking about where the buyer's going to go. And I think that's where, when we're trained, I remember again going back to when I was an inside sales rep and getting promoted to become an account manager, they put us through this training and it was, we're going to train you how to pitch the product. You're going to go through these three, four, five meetings, and each one is going to be on a different product, and you're going to show us how you pitch it. And then we start to think, all right, well, slide one says this, slide two says that, slide three says this, as opposed to being more dynamic and being able to have the conversation. And I think that's a lot of times how sellers think is, all right, well, it's great that you told me that, but I got to get to slide two. Like I'm running out of time here. And I think that's where a lot of the psychological misses come in is when you start to think step by step of this is the process as opposed to what's being told to me. I think there's a lot of things that get missed.
Yeah, something that's called already always listening.
Yeah,
So your mind's already coming up with the answer and not being present to the buyer.
absolutely.
Got it. So when you look at how you hold decisions today compared to 5 years ago, what feels most different?
Well, I mean, I switched industries, so a lot feels different. I went from selling a product or a thing to working for a reseller slash system integrator where we sell everything. And so I think what's really changed is that I get to ask, what do you want to do? As opposed to going in and saying, do you need this thing? And so I think a lot has changed from that perspective. But I think it's also the reason I made the change is because I did used to go in and, I jokingly say I would ask everybody, do you need a window, right? And it's only so many people need it. And even if you needed it, I didn't have the great story of the like it's going to lower your AC bill or whatever it is. I wasn't necessarily thinking 5 years ago I was significantly less customer centric than I am today. And I still think I was pretty good at it, but I think I'm really exclusively focused on outcomes and what people are trying to accomplish. And I think I've grown significantly in that area over the last few years, probably since I wrote the book more than anything else, just because all the stories and the horror stories of, I heard a story about one of the big four coming in and an executive kicked them out of the room because they didn't understand how the business made money. The guy worked in finance and said, how do we make money? Or I think he said, what would it cost us if we were breached? And they said, oh, it costs you so much money. And he said, no, and the insurance would cover everything. They'd give us all of our money back, but I'd spend the rest of my year in room with auditors and government and everybody else, and my life would be hell. And he was like, they didn't even understand while they were trying to sell a massive service to him, they didn't really understand what the consequence was of what they were selling to him. And I just remember him telling me that story that he kicked the big four out because the company everybody works with, because they didn't understand and they didn't care to understand what his challenges were. And I think it doesn't matter whether you work for yourself or you work for the biggest company in the world, if you're not paying attention to the person on the other side of the table, you're not going to be there very long.
Yeah, that's huge. So one final question. What are you still actively figuring out?
Beyond life.
Hey,
Yeah,
your call.
yeah. I mean, actively, I think, again, I made a career switch, and so I'm learning so much right now. I'm selling a lot more technology than I ever did in the past. I think I'm still trying to figure out how to be the best I can be in my industry, how I can be less uh, transactional, because here you can sell everything, and so I don't want to sell every widget to every person. I want to figure out what the strategic projects are and how I can actually make an impact and be helpful. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the day to day when somebody says, I need this little thing. Can you get it for me? And I'm not going to say no, but you get caught up in that versus all right, well, why do you need that? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? And then it leads to a bigger conversation. And I think that's the area I'm trying to improve on now is very, very much digging deeper instead of just solving the surface problems.
Got it. Neil, I really appreciate how you stayed with the questions today, especially the ones that don't resolve neatly. So what stands out for me isn't a conclusion, but an orientation, that leadership at this level is really less about the sharper answers and more how we hold uncertainty without letting it harden us. So thank you very much for being willing to explore that with me today. Greatly appreciated. And also to the people listening in and participating, remember to stay in the inquiry. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.